Greetings, history enthusiasts. I'm Joseph Mooney, and welcome to my video blog on one of the most dramatic and transformative periods in English history, the English Reformation. Today we embark on a journey through a century of profound religious, political, and social upheaval that forever changed the fabric of England. From the seeds of dissent sown by early reformers to the establishment of the Church of England, we'll unravel the complex web of events and figures that shaped this pivotal era. Here's what we'll be covering in today's video blog. First, the early stirrings of reform, John Wycliffe and the Lollards, the rise of anti-clerical sentiments, Renaissance humanism, and the revolutionary ideas of Martin Luther. Secondly, the state of the Catholic Church in England on the eve of the Reformation and why it maintained popularity even after the seismic shifts of the era. Thirdly, the reigns of the Tudor monarchs, Henry VIII, Edward VI, Mary I, and Elizabeth I, and the significant religious changes that happened during their rules. Fourthly, we'll look at key events such as Henry VIII's dramatic break with Rome, the dissolution of the monasteries, the Pilgrimage of Grace, and the Elizabethan religious settlement. Fifthly and finally, the key figures in the English Reformation, including Sir Thomas More, Thomas Cromwell, Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, Henry VIII, Thomas Cranmer, and Pope Clement VI. Let's delve into this captivating story of the English Reformation. Let's set the stage in the 14th century with John Wycliffe, often heralded as the morning star of the Reformation. Born in 1320, Wycliffe was a theologian and professor at Oxford University. He dared to challenge the very foundations of the Catholic Church, advocating that the Bible, not the Pope, should be the supreme authority for Christians. His groundbreaking ideas were radical for the time and shook the religious establishment to its core. Wycliffe's followers, known as the Lollards, became early reformers, spreading his teachings throughout England. They called for the church to return to poverty and simplicity, condemning the opulent lifestyles of many clergymen. The Lollards faced harsh persecution, but their ideas persisted, planting seeds of dissent that would bloom a century later. Fast forward to the 15th and early 16th centuries, and we see growing anti-clerical sentiments among the populace. Many Englishmen and women were increasingly disillusioned with the corruption and moral decay within the church. The clergy's wealth and influence, often seen as excessive and hypocritical, fueled public resentment. Instances of simony, selling church offices, and the scandalous sale of indulgences where people paid for forgiveness of their sins only exacerbated these feelings. Meanwhile, a cultural and intellectual movement known as Renaissance humanism was taking Europe by storm. This movement, emphasizing the study of classical texts and the potential of human achievement, began to question established authorities, including the church. Figures like Erasmus of Rotterdam, a Dutch humanist, criticized the church's excesses and called for a turn to simple and pious Christianity. His works, including The Praise of Folly, lampooned the church's failings, spreading ideas that would influence future reformers. Enter Martin Luther, the German monk whose actions would ignite a firestorm across Europe. In 1517, Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the door of Wittenberg's castle church, challenging the Catholic Church's practices, particularly the sale of indulgences. Luther's bold stand against papal authority and his emphasis on salvation through faith alone resonated with many, leading to the Protestant Reformation. His writings and ideas spread rapidly, aided by the printing press, reaching England and inspiring those who longed for change. On the eve of the English Reformation, the Catholic Church in England was a formidable institution, deeply intertwined with everyday life. Churches were the centre of the community life, providing spiritual guidance and social services. Despite growing criticisms, the church remained popular due to its role in people's lives, from birth to death. The rituals, festivals, and sacraments of the church offered comfort and continuity in a turbulent world. However, beneath this veneer of stability, cracks were beginning to show. The wealth and power of the church were resented by many, and calls for reform were growing louder. Yet the church's deep roots in English society and the people's traditional loyalties would make the coming changes all the more dramatic. Our story takes a decisive turn with the larger-than-life figure of Henry VIII. Henry, born in 1491, was the second son of Henry VII, initially a devout Catholic and author of the Defence of the Seven Sacraments. Henry's personal and political ambitions would see him on a collision course with the Pope and the Roman Catholic Church. By the 1520s, Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon was in trouble. Catherine had failed to provide Henry with a male heir, and Henry was desperate for a son to secure the Tudor dynasty. He sought an annulment from Pope Clement VII, citing biblical passages and questioning the validity of his marriage to his brother's widow, but the Pope, under pressure from Catherine's nephew, Emperor Charles V, refused. Frustrated and determined, Henry took matters into his own hands. In 1533, he married Anne Boleyn, who was already pregnant, and declared his first marriage null and void. This defiance led to his excommunication from the Roman Catholic Church, but Henry was undeterred. In 1534, he enacted the Act of Supremacy, declaring himself the supreme head of the Church of England, effectively severing England's ties with Rome. Parliament played a pivotal role in this transformation. It passed a series of acts that cemented Henry's authority and facilitated the break with Rome. The Act of Supremacy, along with the Treasons Act, which made it a crime to deny the king's supremacy, helped enforce these sweeping changes. Next came the dissolution of the monasteries. Between 1536 and 1541, orchestrated by Henry's chief minister, Thomas Cromwell, monasteries were not just religious centres but also social and economic hubs. Their dissolution was both a religious and financial move, as their vast wealth was transferred to the Crown Treasury. This sparked the Pilgrimage of Grace in 1536, a massive uprising in northern England. Thousands of people, led by Robert Aske, marched to demand the restoration of the monasteries and the reversal of these religious changes. The rebellion was initially met with promises, but Henry ultimately suppressed it brutally, executing its leaders and many participants. By Henry's death in 1547, England had made significant strides towards Protestantism. Though many traditional practices still remained, services were now in English, and the Bible was available to all, laying the groundwork for future reforms, yet the religious landscape was still in flux, with many adherents to the old faith. Henry VIII, born in 1491, reigned from 1509 to 1547. He is one of England's most famous and controversial monarchs. Initially a staunch Catholic, Henry's desire for a male heir and his marriage to Anne Boleyn led to him to break with the Catholic Church. Through the Act of Supremacy in 1534, Henry established the Church of England with himself as its head. His reign saw significant religious and political changes, including the dissolution of the monasteries and the centralisation of royal power. Upon Henry VIII's death, he was succeeded by his young son, Edward VI. Edward, born in 1537 to Henry's third wife, Jane Seymour, was only 9 years old when he became king. Edward was a sickly child, but his short reign was still highly influential in religious reforms and transformations seen in England, due in large part to his regents and advisors. Edward's rule was dominated by regents, initially by his uncle, Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset, and later by John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland. Both were staunch Protestants and pushed for significant reforms. Edward VI's reign saw the introduction of the Book of Common Prayer in 1549, authored by Archbishop Thomas Cranmer. This new liturgy replaced Latin with English, making church services more accessible to the general population. In 1533, the 42 Articles established a clear Protestant doctrine, emphasising justification by faith alone and the primacy of Scripture. Despite religious reforms, Edward's reign faced significant social and economic challenges, including poor harvests and inflation, which led to uprisings like the Kent Rebellion in 1549. Edward's health deteriorated and he died in 1533 at the age of 15, leading to a brief but bloody succession crisis. Upon Edward VI's death, he was briefly succeeded by his cousin, Lady Jane Grey, the 9-day Queen, until she was promptly executed by Edward's sister, Mary I, who was born in 1516 to Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, who ascended the throne as England's first Queen Regent and devout Catholic, committed to reversing the Protestant reforms of her predecessors. Mary's reign saw the restoration of Roman Catholicism. She repealed Protestant legislation and re-established papal authority. Her marriage to Philip II of Spain in 1554 was part of her strategy to strengthen Catholicism in England, though it was deeply unpopular among her subjects. Mary's efforts to restore Catholicism included the persecution of Protestants, known as the Marian persecutions. Around 300 Protestants were burned at the stake, earning her the nickname Bloody Mary. Notable victims included Archbishop Thomas Cranmer and other prominent reformers. Mary's reign was also faced with political and economic difficulties. Her marriage to Philip II led to England's involvement in the Habsburg-Valois War, which strained resources and led to the loss of Calais, England's last possession in France. In 1558, Mary died later that year, leaving no heirs and no one to succeed her but her half-sister, Elizabeth. Elizabeth I, born in 1533 to Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, ascended the throne in 1558 after the death of Elizabeth's sister, Mary I. Elizabeth's reign, known as the Elizabethan era, was marked by relative stability and the establishment of Protestantism as the national faith. Elizabeth saw a middle way between Catholicism and Protestantism. The Elizabethan Religious Settlement Act included the Act of Supremacy, 1559, re-establishing the monarch as the head of the Church of England, and the Act of Uniformity, also in 1559, mandating the use of the Book of Common Prayer. The 39 Articles of 1563 outlined the doctrines of the Church of England, balancing traditional beliefs with Protestant reforms. Elizabeth's reign brought political stability and is often considered a golden age in English history. Her pragmatic approach to governance and religious tolerance helped ease tensions. The period also saw a flowering of English culture, with figures like William Shakespeare and Christopher Marlowe marking lasting contributions to literature and the arts. Elizabeth skillfully navigated foreign policy, maintaining a delicate balance between France and Spain. The defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588, a fleet sent by Philip II of Spain to invade England, was a significant military and symbolic victory, bolstering national pride and Elizabeth's reputation. Sir Thomas More, born in 1478, was a renowned humanist, lawyer, and statesman. He is best known for his work, Utopia, a social and political satire. More was a close advisor of Henry VIII and served as Lord Chancellor from 1529 to 1532. Despite his friendship with Henry, More staunchly opposed the king's separation from the Catholic Church and refused to acknowledge Henry as the supreme head of the Church of England. His steadfast loyalty to the Pope led to his arrest and execution for treason in 1535, making him a martyr for the Catholic cause and seeing the Catholic Church name him as a saint. Thomas Cromwell, born around 1485, was a lawyer and statesman who rose to become Henry VIII's chief minister. Cromwell was instrumental in engineering the king's divorce from Catherine of Aragon and the subsequent establishment of the Church of England. As the architect of the dissolution of the monasteries, Cromwell played a key role in redistributing church wealth to the crown. His reforms modernised the administration of government and the church. However, his fall from grace came swiftly, and he was executed in 1540 on charges of treason and heresy. Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, born in 1473, was one of Henry VIII's most trusted advisors and served as Lord Chancellor from 1515 to 1529. Wolsey was eminently powerful, holding multiple church and state positions, including Archbishop of York and Cardinal. He was responsible for many of Henry's early policies and was a key figure in European diplomacy. However, his failure to secure the annulment of Henry VIII's marriage to Catherine of Aragon led to his downfall. Accused of treason, Wolsey died in 1530 on his way to face trial. Thomas Cranmer, born in 1489, was the first Protestant Archbishop of Canterbury and a leading figure in the English Reformation. Cranmer was instrumental in the annulment of Henry VIII's marriage to Catherine of Aragon and supported the king's religious reforms. He authored the Book of Common Prayer and helped shape the doctrinal foundations of the Church of England. Under Mary I, Cranmer was arrested and ultimately executed for heresy in 1556, becoming a martyr for the Protestant cause. Pope Clement VII, born Giulio de' Medici in 1478, was the head of the Catholic Church from 1523 to 1534. His papacy was marked by political turmoil, including the sack of Rome in 1527. Clement's refusal to annul the marriage of Henry VIII to Catherine of Aragon set off a chain of events which led to the English Reformation. His stance was influenced by political pressures, particularly from Catherine's nephew, Emperor Charles V. Clement's decisions had far-reaching consequences, leading to England to break with Rome and the Catholic Church. Now we're going to quickly look at some of the religious reforms that were put in place during the short reigns of Edward VI and Mary I. Edward's short reign saw the Protestant Reformation advance rapidly. The Book of Common Prayer, introduced in 1549 by Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, standardised English worship and replaced Latin in liturgical texts, making services accessible to all. The 42 Articles issued in 1553 laid down a clear Protestant doctrine, emphasising justification by faith and the supremacy of the Scriptures. However, Edward's reign ended abruptly in 1553 due to his untimely death. On his deathbed, Edward named his cousin, Lady Jane Grey, as his successor to try and ensure a Protestant rule. Lady Jane Grey, known as the 9-Day Queen, was queen for just over a week before being deposed by Mary I, leading to her imprisonment and eventual execution. But the pendulum swung back to Mary I, who ascended the throne in 1553 after her brother's death. Mary, devout Catholic and daughter of Catherine of Aragon, was determined to restore Catholicism. Her marriage to Philip II of Spain was part of this effort, though it was deeply unpopular in England, both by the common people and her advisors. Mary's reign, known for the Marian persecutions, saw 300 Protestants burned at the stake, including prominent figures like Cranmer, Hugh Latimer, and Nicholas Ridley. Her efforts to reverse the Reformation were brutal, but ultimately short-lived. One of Mary's first actions was the execution of Lady Jane Grey in 1554, as previously mentioned. Jane, a symbol of prominent Protestant resistance, was seen as a threat to Mary's throne. Her execution is seen as a sombre prelude to what would be seen as a bloody reign by Bloody Mary. Upon the death of her sister, Mary I, Elizabeth became queen in 1558 and faced the daunting task of uniting a fractured nation. Her Elizabethan religious settlement aimed to find a middle ground between Catholic and Protestant extremes. The Act of Supremacy in 1559 re-established the monarch's control over the Church, while the Act of Uniformity required the use of revised Book of Common Prayer. The 39 Articles of 1563 provided a doctrinal basis for the Church of England, blending traditional beliefs with Protestant reforms. Elizabeth's pragmatic approach fostered relative religious peace and stability, securing her reign and England's Protestant identity and her role in history of England. As our journey through the English Reformation comes to a close, we see a period marked by intense conflict, profound change, and enduring legacy. From the early stirrings of dissent with John Wycliffe and the Lollards, to the dramatic reforms under Henry VIII, and the religious extreme roller coasters seen in the reigns of Edward VI and Mary I, to the end of the English Reformation in the Elizabethan era. It was a time of transformation. We've explored the deep criticisms of the Catholic Church and its attempts to reform from within and without. Despite the upheavals, the Church's deep roots and traditions maintained its influence. Henry VIII's quest for a male heir and his political manoeuvres set England on a path to religious independence. All his successors each left their mark on the nation's spiritual landscape. The Elizabethan settlement, with its blend of tradition and reform, provided a lasting foundation for the Church of England and helped to stabilise the nation. The English Reformation was not just a religious transformation, but a societal revolution, reshaping England's identity and its place in the world. Thank you for joining me today, Joseph Mooney, on this historical journey. The echoes of the English Reformation still resonate with all of us today, reminding us of the profound impact of faith, power, and change in our shared history. Until next time, keep exploring the past to understand the present.